everybody, I'm Pastor AJ Houseman, and welcome to 10-Foot Pole, a podcast dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 3. Our guest for today is a nice sort of reunion guest, is Deacon Julie Stecker, who is the assistant to the bishop for communications and youth and family ministry in the Delaware, Maryland Synod, and the assistant to the bishop for youth and family ministry in the Metro DC Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America.
Thanks for having me.
Well, first of all, your job title is longer than it was the last time we had this conversation.
It is. I've added another whole synod.
Mm-hmm. And I also felt like I, needed to do sort of a, and there's more.
Don't call yet.
How many more things can we add to your plate?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's great. Great
well,
life.
Good. Well, thanks for being back on Season 3. This is great.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Deacon Julie was the very first podcast guest ever.
Way back in the
and
day.
Also, I like to give Deacon Julie a lot of credit for the creation of this podcast. As there, I don't remember what the conversation was, but there was something, and there was some beer involved, and something got said, and then I just go, listen, I'm going to start a podcast and talk about all this crazy shit that no one wants to talk about in church. And then I did, and then here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, I like to say I'm very idea generative when I inevitably sunset into consulting, as my peers and I are all destined to do. Apparently, my job is just my job is just going to be a brainstorming firm where I just come up with ideas, but then I don't have to do all the follow through with them, because that's really where I shine.
So you just go into churches and tell them how to be better. And then
churches, anywhere. If I have no parameters, I'll just tell you exactly what I think you should do, and then you can figure out how it happens based on the things that you know. But I'm here to come up with ideas and then leave.
Beautiful. Yeah. I appreciate your ideas here, and I guess luckily I at least have a little follow through.
Exactly.
All right. Today, Deacon Julie and I are going to discuss the gospel lesson for Sunday, October 1st, 2023. If you plan to go to church, you'll probably hear this. Or maybe not, actually, because a lot of churches celebrate St. Francis of Assisi and do a blessing of the animals that day. So you all might be outside hanging out with puppies and having some sort of different readings to go along with that. My favorite's the one from Job where you ask the beast. That's the best. Ask the beast and they will tell you. It's the best. Anyways, if you get to hear that, great. I hope you have a happy Sunday with all of the cute puppies and other animals that people bring, which I really love because it's 90% dogs, and then there's one person that brings their cat in a cage or their bird, and you're like, yes.
Iguanas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big day.
Little goldfish in the aquarium tank out.
Yes.
All right. Anyways. If you go to a church that's nope, we're going to do the same old shit, you're going to hear this. So you're going to hear Matthew 21, verses 23 to 32. And today I'm going to read it from the New Revised Standard Version, Updated Edition, which I actually didn't cross-reference it. I don't know if there's anything that's different between this and the older New Revised Standard Version.
I'll read along with my eyes in the old New Revised Standard Version, and we can
Sounds great. Okay, here we go. When he entered the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him as he was teaching and said, "By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority?" Jesus said to them, "I will also ask you one question. If you tell me the answer, then I will also tell you by what authority I do these things. Did the baptism of John come from heaven, or was it of human origin?" They argued with one another. "If we say from heaven, he will say to us, 'Why then did you not believe him?' But if we say of human origin, we are afraid of the crowd, for all regard John as a prophet." So they answered Jesus, "We do not know." And he said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." What do you think? A man has two sons. Jesus is still talking. A man has two sons. He went to the first and said, "Son, go and work in the vineyard today." The son answered, "I will not." But later he changed his mind and went. The father went to the second and said to the same. And that son answered, "I go, sir." Apparently he didn't make a full sentence. But he did not go. Which of the two did the will of the Father? They answered, "The first." Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are going into the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes believed him. And even after you saw it, you did not change your minds and believe him." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Jesus is on fire today.
Yeah.
I love it. This is
no notable changes between the two versions.
Great.
Including the full sentence or lack thereof.
I go, sir. That's how my
I go, sir. That's
this is how my toddler speaks. I go.
Correct. I go.
I go.
I go. I just one of my toddlers yesterday just repeated after an adult who said, I know, and he went, I know. And so now he's just going around going, I know. And that's the vibes that I'm getting from the second son.
I love it. Yeah, that is yep. Same.
I go.
I love this is just like, this is a real cheeky Jesus moment, right? Like they have this argument with him, right? They're trying to call him out, not unusual. We get this attitude from them all the time, right? And his answer, like it feels childish. I know it's not. I know there's a point to it, but that's sort of childish. Then neither am I going to tell you.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question. It's like he's like the bridge troll. And they're like, we want to pass. And he's like, fine, answer my question, and I'll tell you. But if you can't, then I won't. Also, I'm going to tell you in a riddle. This is very troll Jesus.
Oh, yeah. Troll Jesus. That's going to be the title. Bridge Troll Jesus.
Bridge Troll Jesus.
Because then he keeps going, right? Like, yeah. What do you think? A man has two sons.
Not only am I like not going to tell you the answer, but like then I'm going to like make you have to think about this like story that you're going to be like, that's not relevant, except it is. But when you're, when you've already checked out because Jesus is like not going to tell you the answer, I don't know that they're really like super tracking the parable that Jesus is giving and like internalizing it and being like, oh yes, absolutely, I can apply that to my daily life and actions. But for the benefit of others, I guess.
I think you get sort of like, the Gospel of Mark has the disciples, and I feel like the Gospel of Matthew is the priests.
Everybody else.
Yeah, there's a better, I'm sure, a punny way to say that I don't have, but
yes.
It's really interesting. So like the Gospel of Matthew, like the author is trying really hard to make sure that we understand like these challenges that keep happening with Jesus. Like they're really important because it's not just like, it's not like the Gospel of Matthew is very much, or Mark is very much like, he did this, he went here, he did this, he went here, and he did all of this so that you would know that he is the Son of God, the Messiah, blah, blah, blah. The Gospel of Matthew takes it one step farther and has all of these, records all of these encounters with these church authorities for you to really like hone in and understand what Jesus's authority is and where it's coming from. Like to really, it's not just what he says and where he goes, but it's really important here to name this authority, or else he's just like, he could just be any other prophet or, charismatic church leader, but where his like works and authority come from, it's really important that the author, like for the audience, right, of the original audience of Matthew, right, that's what needs to be drilled home to them. And so this is another one of those conversations.
Yeah. And I will say that my forte in reading and interpreting the Bible does not lie in like what the audience was, like the specifics of the audience so much. Like, just anecdotally, when I took Gospels, when I took Gospels in seminary, we had this thing on the first day of class where we took a quiz that was like, which gospel is this from? And it was like characteristics of each gospel. And then you take the same quiz on the last day of class. And I did worse on the last day of class than the first day, because it just like does not usually like settle into my brain.
You're like big picture story of Jesus, not so much like these are the 4 individual stories of Jesus.
Yeah, no. That's not really how my brain works, which is maybe like a little function of some possibly undiagnosed ADHD, where I'm just like, I can't keep those in segments in my brain. They have to all just live together.
This is in the Jesus box.
It's exactly.
It doesn't have compartments.
But I imagine that there was something going on with the people to whom Matthew was writing, where they were like super concerned with authority. And so it was really important to like point out where Jesus's authority came from, kind of like drive that nail home a little bit. Oh, that's a terrible
it is
phrase to use about Jesus.
It was, yeah.
Sorry.
Foreshadowing or punny there. I'm not really sure.
I am good at puns. Where I lack in contextual knowledge, I can make up for in puns. But that one was unintentional.
Crucifixion puns. That's always a good category to excel at. Okay, so I will say, to your point about authority in the Gospel of Matthew, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago with Pastor Jelaine, where we talked about because the Gospel of Matthew has so many parable metaphor stories with slavery image. And so that really feeds, and we talked about all the problems that's with that. So go back and listen to that episode. I'm not going to dive into that again. But with that, it's sort of like this hierarchy system, right? And so that's that lens that the author of Matthew is coming at. And so we see that here too in these conversations. This idea of authority, who has it? Who gets to give it?
Yeah. Just the whole conversation of authority in, the year of our Lord 2023. It just conversations about authority make me just feel a little bit icky. Because
talk about it.
I think that regardless of the contexts in which we find ourselves, we can all point to places where maybe like traditionally held authority has shown us that it like wasn't so great. Places where we would expect to find like that, like authority, like I think about, for example, the office of like President of the United States. And at a time in our lives, it was just like, okay, well, the person is the president. And by the nature of the person being the president, like you give them respect because they have authority and we like trust the process by which they gained their authority and blah, blah. And I think that, like personally, I have felt, during a span of a few years that it was difficult to give the office the respect. And so like that has tarnished my understanding of like the authority that any president might have, because I was like, well, I wasn't really vibing that was really like, that I should give that person respect because by nature of their office. And I think that that's like trickled down in a variety of ways. Also like just some of the nonsense that has been happening in the church for decades. This where we have seen time after time, I'll use specific language as a deacon, pastors who have like serially abused their authority in order to like take advantage of others, either for like personal benefit or whatever, that I just get like a little itchy when I start like having conversations about authority, because I'm like, well, so who decided and who said, that that this person has authority and like, okay, yes, God, like
Mm-hmm.
I trust that. But when we start having those conversations now, I'm always like, I don't know about this. I don't know that I want to really talk about authority because I don't want to have to probe into like, does this person deserve authority? Does that person?
So I think that we're having, okay, let me back up. So I have been working on recently writing some constitution and bylaws material.
Really?
Because I'm now working for an organization that needs to have those. And it just, so I've been thinking a lot about authority and where it comes from and what these governing documents mean and how they get used and stuff like that. And to your point of thinking about some things and how we have thought about authority recently and our shift in it, is I think that especially for white people, probably the last few years have been very challenging to our understanding of authority and respect.
Yes.
And I say that and also thinking about, especially like institutional authority, right?
Yeah.
I grew up too, like you trusted them. They're the pastor of the church. It's that institutional authority comes down the bishop. You trusted them. They're the, like that's the thing. The same thing with like government and, like the senator, like, okay, maybe I don't agree with everything the senator says, but like, I assume that, I think they have that implied respect for me that they have a degree that makes them qualified for what they're doing, that they actually know what they're talking about, even if I don't disagree with their things. And I feel what we have had sort of an awakening and a realization in our authority positions that may not always be true.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something to wrestle with there in the fact that I do think that is more of an awakening for white folks. I think that you'll find folks that sit in other demographics of the world have been like, yeah, we've known those institutions have been shitty and racist and oppressive and not functioning properly or for the benefit of all people for a very long time.
For a very long time. Yeah.
I want to throw that out there too, right?
Yeah. No, that's super real. Yeah.
That also goes with the context of our gospel reading today, right? So like this is that same system that Jesus is kind of calling them out on, right? And they do that same thing that politicians do everywhere. They don't actually give him an answer, right? Like they do that whole well, we'll just tell them that we don't know. Because then they don't have to take this side or that side or, make anybody upset at them.
Yeah. Super wishy-washy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that whole like where we get to like sort of see their side conversation where they're like, well, if we say this, then like he's gonna get us in this trap. And if we say this, then he's gonna get us in this other trap. And like we're privileged into that conversation to hear it. Which is just like it's very clear that they don't care actually about like what the right answer is or about like what Jesus might be trying to help them understand. They just care about like the perception of how they answer.
Yeah.
And who says that?
Which sounds like, oppressive institutional authority everywhere.
Yeah.
How many times has that happened? And I'll even say that like for several churches that I've worked at, like something happens and like, well, we need to come together. Okay, none of my small churches work like this because I was like me and 1.5 other staff members. And so like we didn't take the time to do this. But I'll say the last time I worked on a large staff, like if something happened, there would be sort of a party line memo in each of our mailboxes that like, hey, if anybody in the congregation asks about this, these are our official responses.
Yep. And like the idea that like people wouldn't be able to hear those like very rehearsed responses the idea that they're just like, oh, well, this is what everyone's saying, so it must be true, as opposed to like, this is everyone's saying, so it must be rehearsed. Yeah. Yeah.
I will admit I wasn't good at playing along.
Sure.
But I did just
not at all.
Well, I never like went against the party line because I also didn't want to get fired, right? But I did do I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know.
I was very good at that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And it's so hard because I also think that like in a lot of ways we have like allowed the wishy-washiness to just be like the decisive word on
Yeah.
things, right? Which is how we've gotten to like this place where we have all of these like societal ills that no one is willing to do anything about because we've never done anything about them before. Because our history has just been like not doing anything about it. Um, I One of the ways in which I'm a very good millennial is having memorized the entirety of the Hamilton original Broadway
Obviously.
cast recording. And this is like, it was, and again, I assume that everything that's in Hamilton is historically accurate and
Yeah.
factual.
Sure. Sure.
But it's
100%.
this, it's the whole downfall of Aaron Burr, right? That he is just like unwilling to say anything on one side of the issue or not. And it's like, that's what's gotten him to the places where he is. And he like comes up against this person who's really willing to say, no, here's what's right and here's what's wrong. Again, there are some things we can talk about the problematic nature of Alexander Hamilton, but in the musical in which he is the hero, that's ultimately like what brings about like Burr's downfall is because he like came up one too many times against someone who said like, I'm not satisfied with the middle of the road. I don't know that like that helped us progress anywhere really in the couple hundred years since the Aaron Burr Alexander Hamilton days. But it's like it's everything old is new again, everything new is old again, whatever it is. This is a thing that we've just been doing forever is like when we have power, we maintain it by not taking a side and by just kind of staying in the middle and skating by on it.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we're entering a sort of a new era where both sides are so polarized that they absolutely can't come to the middle.
Yeah, and I don't know like what the answer is there. And it's hard because I find myself firmly on a side, I'll say, right? And I think that there's like a lot that's lost in like aspirations for unity. Because we're willing to like sacrifice. Bishop Gohl from Delaware, Maryland, has said that we often sacrifice the most vulnerable people on the altar of unity. And so I'm not willing to do that for the sake of unity, but like there has to be someplace.
No, that's powerful, and I think you're right. And again, I'm going to bring us back to our text because I think that ties in here too. Because in Jesus's parable, right, like this is how he ends it. Like, the prostitutes and the tax collectors. So again, the people that would have been the outcast, the shunned, the lowest of the lowest, the people that they assume are the worst sinners, and the people you don't want to hang out with. Jesus goes right ahead and says, like, they're going to get into heaven before you.
Right.
So I think, so Bishop Yehiel Curry of the Metro Chicago Synod, this is before he was bishop, but a few years ago at a training, he was doing the Bible study at a different training that we were having at the church-wide offices in Chicago. And he said, you always need to read the passage from the bottom up. Who is the least of these? Who is the most vulnerable? Who are we not hearing from? Who is that? Who is the most vulnerable person? And then to read it from that perspective. So what is this? So where's the good news from that perspective? Holy crap, Jesus is like, listen,
I'm telling you. The tax collectors and the prostitutes.
But it draws into question there then the big uncomfortable question that every Christian needs to face. What does it mean to be a good Christian?
Yeah.
Because Jesus is calling the church leaders, so the people who are the pastors, who are the bishops, he's calling them bad Christians.
Yeah.
And he's calling the people that society has treated like total shit and has called the worst of the worst. He's calling them the good Christians.
Yep.
So where do we fit into that? Where do we sit with that?
Yeah. I think that, I was like trying to find good, like a good human interest article that showed like, oh, this is where someone who like you would least like, like a Good Samaritan type article, the person who you would least expect is the person who does the most Christ-like thing. But there have just been, like there have been examples and examples of those over the years. But I also like some of that just comes, I think, from like good humanity, which I do think still exists.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to like label every person who does something Christ-like as like being a good Christian, because that may not be how they identify themselves. That like may, negate their own faith life or whatever. But I do want to say that like, I can also look out at the news cycle and see lots of places where I can like definitively say that is a person being a bad Christian. I don't think it means like they don't get into heaven. I mean, I think they're, Jesus says like a little further back in the line than maybe someone else. But whereas like I don't think that you, just because you do something Christ-like, it doesn't make you a Christian. I think there are some things that you can do that like definitely make you not a good Christian, even if you go to church every Sunday, even if you're the pastor or the deacon or the whatever at the church, and giving your whole life to it. Like, I think there are some things that put you a little further back in the line.
So I'm gonna go dive in here really quick about like this idea of theology, works righteousness versus what Lutherans talk about. So like just to get a little past story for a moment. There are different sort of like spectrums of what people think. So like typically, I don't want to pick on them, but the easy ones to pick on for this is this whole sort of sanctification process during life of the United Methodists. The Methodists believe this, right? That you are earning this gift, that it's a gift that's given, but you still have to earn it, right? And so you need to do these things and live a certain way and live in this like little righteous box in order to like earn this gift, right? And that you spend your whole life trying to become holy enough to receive this gift that Jesus has given. Lutherans take a little bit different perspective. We say, listen, there's absolutely nothing that you can do to earn this gift. Luther said we're worms. There's, you're so terrible. It was nothing that humans can possibly do to earn the gift that we have been given. But that, as scripture tells us, it is a gift that we have already been given. So from today on for the rest of your life, there's nothing you can do to undo the gift that Christ has already given you, right? So then people are like, well, then that doesn't even make sense. So then what's the whole point of being a good Christian at all? To where, again, what we would say as Lutherans in our Lutheran theology is that because of this gift, our faith cannot help but to do these good things in response to it.
Yeah.
Right? So like, because that we've been given a gift, we want to do we want to do good things, right? Also, Jesus says, I give you a new commandment. Love God and love your neighbors, right? Those are the only two things that are required of you, right? Like, that's it. And so like, it's a difference. I hope that you can understand like the difference in what it means to like do the things that we do, the motivation behind it.
Yeah.
Which I do think is intrinsically different. This also goes into, if they're avid podcast listeners, they've heard me talk about the relative moral compass of the world before, because if you're new to the podcast, take a moment to sit with this. Morality is not a fixed thing. It is a moving target, and what is right and wrong is also a moving target depending on your perspective of the world, the way you've been raised, potentially what your religion is, your family of origin you grew up in, where you grew up, all those things feed into how we understand each individual person is programmed to what is right and what is wrong. So if you understand that, like, what everyone's perspective of that is different. There's not a fixed position of this is right and this is wrong, but rather, again, to use a little Lutheran language, all of life is a gray area. And for us, how do we choose the right thing to do in that gray area that we think is that proper response to this gift from God?
Yeah. Which is why I think that it feels splashiest when we're looking at like Christian leaders who have done something that most people might say is morally or ethically or even legally wrong, is because often those are the voices that are most loudly saying what God has determined is right or wrong, and using the Bible often as a weapon in order to get that point across. And so it feels like, okay, so you told us that we had to do this and we had to live this certain way and be this certain way, but like you weren't doing that. You were so black and white in your instruction to us, but your life was more gray. Which again, like I think that we can all understand the gray area, and we can still have opinions about if things are morally or ethically right or wrong. In a situation where a leader has fallen from grace, as it were, but it feels so much like a punch when that person got to where they were, where they got the authority that they had by telling people, no, I have the answer for what is right and what is wrong. Yeah. Yeah, I like the gray area. I always wish there were a little more black and white.
Yeah. I think that's what, so to me, the gray area is what makes our faith both beautiful, but also messy. Because I mean, human beings are messy creatures. And I think that every situation is just so different based on like the circumstances, the systems we've created, the people involved, everything. Like it's never. I also tell people, anytime you want to use the Bible to absolutely prohibit something, you're probably already wrong, because the Bible disagrees with itself in so many places, right? And then we also like the episode with Pastor Chris where we talked about the child sacrifice, right? And like, again, footnote,
10-foot pole does not endorse child sacrifice.
Does not endorse any sort of killing of humans, child sacrifice, any of the above. But we talked about, like, it says, well, the 10 Commandments say very clearly, thou shalt not kill. I'm like, well, that's actually one term. There are 6 different terms for killing. You're just not allowed to do that one. The other 5, totally fine. And it tells you all the permissible reasons why you should use them, right? So, like, the Bible is nothing but gray. All of it.
Yeah.
And so how do we, I think what's can be most challenging for us as Christians in trying to answer this question of, well, what does it mean to be a good Christian, is to try to figure out how to live in that gray area.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what's beautiful, though.
Yeah. And as I was like thinking about gray area and the 2 sons, thinking like, at first I was like, oh, well, the first son is like very gray area because he's like, I'm not going to go. And then he's like, oh, well, okay. Like, I'm actually feeling like, okay. And, I'm thought about it again. I'm going to go. Like, that was his life situation. Then I was like, oh, but also the second son is the gray area. Like, the second son is like, yeah, I'm going to go do it. And then something comes up and he's like, I'm not going to go do it. And so really the issue is that we are all both sons.
Ooh, Julie, right? What a good Lutheran perspective on this. Now we are both simultaneously.
Oh, I have that tattooed on my wrist.
Yeah, they can't
so
see.
That was a reminder. I'm sorry. I just raised my wrist to my camera. But there's a picture on Instagram somewhere of my wrist tattoos that says "Simul Justus et Peccator," that we are 100% simultaneously saint and sinner. And so it's not like saying, it's not that everyone is always 100% saying, yes, I'm going to go serve the Lord, and then they're turning around and doing something different. But it's like, so what do we like bend towards? How do we arc as a human? Because also, like, saying that you're going to do it and then not doing it doesn't like kick you into hell. Like, Jesus doesn't say like they're going to go to heaven and you're not.
Yeah.
Jesus says they're going ahead of you. Yeah. Which, when you've been at the front of the line, feels like you're getting kicked out entirely, but that's not actually it.
That's also a good thing to note. He doesn't tell the high priest that they're going to hell. He just says, we're going to put you at the back of the line.
Yeah.
And then you can theologically interpret that however you want. The Catholics have a very defined system for what that line looks like.
Yes.
Lutherans are a little more loosey-goosey, right?
Well, that's just in general. Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's that thing, like you were saying, where there's no, like, the black and white just doesn't, there's not even like black, white, and gray. It's just all gray. Right? Oh, man.
Julie, I want to point out a couple, with the time that we have left here, I want to dive
Yeah.
into one more really hard thing that neither of us are going to answer.
Oh no.
So you already know what I'm going to say. The thing about this authority, and the continued sort of prod and the different conversations and sort of like arguments that Jesus has with the high priest, right? It's very important that these happen in Matthew the way that they're happening because they're culminating in a big event, right? And it's very important in each of these how they end, that either Jesus wins or at least comes out in a way that like the chief priests lose every time, right? And so it's all stacking up to kind of create this big anger ball that they're going to take at Jesus, right? So it's built this way for two reasons. One, to exemplify that God's authority is over the authority of the mortal world, right? That God's authority is higher. And second, it's part of the foreshadowing so that they crucify him.
Yeah.
Which this leads to a really sticky theological point. And for many people who didn't go to seminary, you've probably never gotten stuck in one of these arguments. But the big question, did Jesus have to be crucified in order for us to be saved? That's a huge theological question. So, there's sort of like, well, if Jesus just had to be slaughtered like a lamb in order to be the sacrifice on the altar for all of our sins, what the hell's the point of the rest of the story? We don't need to know that. It's not important, right? So like clearly there's a purpose there.
Yeah.
So it gets into atonement theory. It gets into this. Yeah. Sorry, I'll let you go.
I in advance apologize to both of my bishops in case I say something that is too heretical. They'd both be fine. They're both fine with a certain amount of heresy, I think.
I'm gonna blame Dr. Kristen Largen.
Oh, yes, blame and thank.
Yes.
I actually like. Again, I think that's a gray area too, because I actually think the answer is, did Jesus need to be crucified? Is that it doesn't matter if Jesus needed to be or not. I mean, my personal piety, theological commitments would say that like nothing actually had to happen for God to work, because I think that God can work past whatever like human trappings we might have. But like it was gonna happen. You have this person coming in the midst of people who have been straddling the fence and getting ahead for all of time, and saying, actually, no, there's a different way, and saying these like radical things and getting people riled up about it and like getting people to literally follow him. It was going to happen. And so it's sort of like in conversations about theodicy, when we talk, which theodicy is the question of whether God, why God allows suffering or why suffering happens, sort of struggling with the idea of suffering and a God who loves us. Is that like, do I think God causes suffering? No, but suffering happens, and it's just a foregone reality, conclusion, whatever, of our lives. And so we have to look at like, so then why does it matter? Right. And I'm not the authority to speak on Jesus's crucifixion. But I think that by saying over and over in the Gospel of Matthew, like looking at where Jesus's authority comes from, that because the crucifixion was going to happen, we can say like, okay, well then it's very clear that like God was with Jesus in all of this, because God is Jesus and Jesus is God. And,
yeah.
I mean, it's not Trinity Sunday, so I'm going to avoid that. But I don't know. I don't care if it matters if Jesus needed to be crucified, because he was. That doesn't give an answer in the time we have left.
No, I'm trying to find. So the episode that we did in season 2 with Pastor Lauren Jenkins, Pastor Lauren brought up the concept of the nonviolent atonement theory.
Yeah.
And I know that we put something on here because we did have a listener who asked was like, wait a minute, I thought that the whole thing is this had to be this way. And I pointed them towards the material for the nonviolent atonement theory, but I cannot seem to find it now. That's not helpful, I realize.
I mean, I just tacitly trust and agree with anything Pastor Lauren Jenkins says.
I mean,
For what
agreed.
it's
She's
worth.
way smarter than I am. So typically,
Yeah. All questions, please direct to Pastor
Yep.
Lauren Jenkins.
Denny Weaver, that's who wrote it.
Oh.
It's a book that you can get, the Nonviolent Atonement Theory by Denny Weaver. It's a book that you can buy on Amazon. But he was sort of the original kind of theologian behind this idea that, like, Jesus's salvific work, he may not necessarily have had to die for that. I haven't read it. I've only read like other articles and things about it. I know some people did read it in seminary. But so the way that like we approach this in seminary is we read like, you know, like a sort of summary, about like a 2 pages sort of summary on like 10 different atonement theories, right?
Yeah.
You know, you have the Christus Victor, you have the really traditional ones, and then sort of some of these more non-traditional ones. All to say that, like, even this thing among Christians that we don't agree on, right? And you can find a very valid perspective on all sides. I really do struggle with the idea that, like, that God sent their only son just to be brutally murdered. Right. That doesn't jive with any understanding of God that I have.
Agree.
Also, it doesn't. Why do we need so much information about who Jesus is, what he said, and what he did if that was his only purpose?
Right.
You know, you don't have dinner with, you know, have a nice conversational interview with your cow before you eat them and slaughter them for your meal. Like, what, this doesn't make any. Right. So, like, clearly there's more to it, you know. That's this kind of where
like it could have been a lot cleaner if it was like just a sacrificial thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like you could have just been like, this is my son. Again, referencing the earlier episode, I'm just gonna casually hang up to the mountain with him and throw him on the slaughter, and then we'll be good. Yeah.
Just want to know. I think it's so. I like the idea when it comes to sort of like, was it necessary? I don't know, but the whole thing of like you said, because of and what the author of Matthew is getting at, because of this political rallying that's happening, it was inevitable.
Yeah. Right.
And that, yeah, the institutional church, as well as other institutions, sacrifice a lot of vulnerable people.
Yeah. I didn't really wake up today thinking that I would be talking about atonement theory, but I'm about it. I'm going to think about it some more.
Sorry about that.
No, it's great. It's always great.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is it's a hard conversation. And when I write the discussion questions, I'll probably write one about atonement theories. And then I'm sorry to every pastor out there that's trying to do these conversations, and there's someone in your group that's going to blow up on you.
Sure. But you know, again, send them a couple books, say, read through these, and then we'll talk about it when you're done.
That's what I like to do with a lot of things. If people want to get all huffy and puffy about it, I'm like, well, have you read anything about it? Not saying you have to agree, but like, let's do a little education.
What do we do?
What happens? Yeah. I think there's just to say that see, even atonement theory is a gray area.
Ugh, I know. This is, yeah. And I mean, when I have these moments where I'm like, oh man, I can't like pin down anything anymore. Like I feel so, I'm like, what is true, what is not true. I think about Dr. Marty Stevens, who actually wasn't in her class when this was said, but they were talking about a story in the Old Testament where like they were discussing the possibility of it being more allegorical than like historical.
Oh yeah.
And someone said, I just feel like the rug has been pulled out from under me, like coming to seminary. And she said, but what's under the rug? It's the floor. Like you still have the floor. And so that was my like very poor attempt at a North Carolina accent. I apologize, Dr. Stevens. But it's the idea that like, okay, when I feel very like, oh, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what I feel about atonement theory. What do I think? I have to remember like, oh, I still have like God. God is my floor of like, okay, that's still like a truth in my life. That's still a thing that exists. And you know, the rug can get pulled out from under us, but that's okay because there's a floor under it.
That's beautiful. That's the good news. That's the good news.
Amen.
Thanks be to God. That's it.
And then under the floor sometimes is a bridge troll named Jesus.
All right. On that note, thanks everyone for joining Deacon Julie and I on this really great but really hard conversation. And yeah, I hope that you can have some good discussion and really discern where you're at in your own theology in the gray area that is faith. And of course, you can catch us every Tuesday with new episodes. Tuesday at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you're looking for those for your commute, don't leave before 7 a.m. But then you'll have it. Okay. You can learn more at 10footpolepodcast.com and find us on Facebook and Instagram at 10footpolepodcast and wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. The 10-Foot Pole Podcast is a ministry of the Delaware Maryland Synod. To learn more, go to demdsynod.org. Take care.